Welcome to Developer Tools 101. Today, we're going to cover not only the developer console, but also our command line interface and the ways that you can use those tools to develop Alexa skills for yourself. Before we get started, I have a bunch of introductory stuff that I want to make sure you're aware of. If you're joining us through the On24 console, please be sure to check out all the engagement widgets that are on the screen. You'll see the attendee chat, and my colleagues are on the back end ready to respond to your questions and feedback. We also have a survey, which I would very much appreciate your response to. It helps us understand what you liked, what you didn't like, and how we can make more of this content in the future. There's an option to send us some emoticons, which we love to see at the bottom of the screen. Also, make sure to join our Slack channel. There's a link to do so on the bottom right of the screen, and it's a community of over 3,000 Alexa developers that are there helping each other, sharing code and questions and information, and answering anything that you may need as well. It's a really great community. They're friendly and they're open to beginners. I highly recommend it. And finally, for everyone joining us live through our social channels, we are monitoring the chat, so please feel free to ask any questions you have on the platform you're currently watching this on. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. All right, so the place that I need to start is in the developer console. You can find it at developer.amazon.com, and you end up in the Alexa developer console, and that's what we're seeing here is my list of skills. So instead of doing what we normally do and start a new skill, we're just going to open a skill that I've been working on for a while. And we'll take a look at the developer console that already has a bunch of things going on. So I can look at my interaction model. I can see that I have a whole bunch of intents that are already created. I have slot types that have been created for different purposes. This is a real skill. It really does some things. And the context of the skill isn't important, but I just want to show tools that are available to us in the developer console, as well as the CLI and inside Visual Studio Code. We'll get to that later. But I want to show a real skill in the context of those tools. I thought that would make sense. So the first thing we're going to start with is this Evaluate Model button up here at the top. You find that by going into your intents, looking at your interaction model, and clicking on Evaluate Model. And you are presented with a text box. So this is a pretty simple process. This is just a way for you to type to your skill and see how your model will respond. Now, the important thing to note about this is that it's not talking to your code or the backend system for your skill. This is only talking to your model. So every time you type something into this box, it is like it's the first time you're talking to your skill. It's not remembering any kind of context or history or anything like that. But I am talking to my skill. And so if I say something like, say Bazinga, because it knows all of the different speech cons that are in a skill, you can see that it hits my speech con intent, and it tells me that the speech con that the user requested is the word Bazinga. I could also say something like, say she shoots, she scores. We get the same kind of result, right? Because both of those are speech cons that Alexa can say. So I end up in the speech con intent, and I can see that the speech con slot is that. So if we look at something different, let's say I want the sound effect intent. Give me a laser sound effect. In this case, you can see that it tells me, oh, well, I would hit the sound effect intent, and the value that I would provide you as the name of the sound effect is laser. If there were other competing intents or utterances that made sense, it would show you the other ones that it evaluated. But in this case, this was the only choice that it thought was possible, and so it used this one. Now, this is a really nice, simple way to test one utterance. But as you grow a skill and you have lots of utterances and slots, all of that stuff comes together to create your model. And you can end up with some conflicts. As an example, I actually have one here in my utterance conflicts, where you can see that I have the word goodbye can land in two different places. I have the stop intent. Goodbye lands in the stop intent and tells people to leave the skill. But goodbye is also a speech con. And so while I'm not very worried about this for my skill, you can see how those conflicts can start to come up as you're building other parts of your skill without even realizing it. So as I come back to this Evaluate Model tool, what we can also do is use the NLU Evaluation tab, which is a more advanced version of this. And so you can see that I've already done some things here before, but I'll give you an example of how this works. So I'm going to create a new annotation set, and I'm going to call this speech cons. And in this annotation set, what I want to do is create utterances that I want to be able to run as tests. So I might say something like, say Bazinga. And that's the utterance that I'm expecting to test against. Now I have to say what the success criteria is for this test. So in this case, I expect the intent to be the speech con intent. I expect that there's going to be a slot, which is the value speechcon, and it's using its knowledge of my model to fill these things in for me. So I'm going to say that the speechcon is the name of the slot, and the value that I would expect is Brazinga. And you can see that it already knows all of my slot values. So all of that is great. Perfect. Okay, let's do another one, which is she shoots, she scores, and I'll add say to that. And in this case, it's the same idea. SpeechCon intent, we're going to say that it's a SpeechCon, and the value we expect is she shoots, she scores. Okay, so we have two of those. I'll add something different. We'll do one of the sound effects ones as well. So I could say play a laser sound effect. And in this case, I know it's going to be the sound effect intent, and my value is going to be sound effect, and it's going to be laser. So just by setting it up like that, I can now save my annotation set. And once that's saved, I can come back to my evaluate model tool, and I can see that I have a bunch of different kinds of tests that I can run. And so the one that I want to run is the one that we just called SpeechCon. So I'm going to run this evaluation, and with the magic of television, we'll fast forward through the time it takes to run this. Okay, and as you can see, our test passed. So we can actually open up our evaluation and see the results of our test. We can see that all of these have green check marks next to them, meaning that they did what they were supposed to do. And if we had something fail, if we change something about our model, the next time that we run our test, we might see that something turns red and fails. That gives us a clear indication that something that we're expecting to behave is no longer behaving that way. This is a really powerful tool and a really useful way to understand what's going on with your interaction model. So that's the evaluate model tool. We have both the single utterance profiler as well as the NOU evaluation, which allows us to put all those together. And if you want to find or modify your annotation sets, you can find them right here on the left-hand side. So I have both of my annotation sets that I've created in the past right here, and I can open them, and we're back in the tool that we were using just a moment ago. So that's one that I wanted to show. Another thing that is built into the developer console that I think is incredibly useful is under multimodal responses. So if you've ever built anything with APL before, or even if you haven't, APL is designed to provide the visual language for devices like the Echo Show. So I can create responses here using this tool. So I might have a response that I call welcome or something like that. And what it's going to present me with is a bunch of templates. Now, you don't have to use these as templates as is. You can modify them to your heart's content, but you can start with one of these, and you probably have something similar to this that you're thinking of. So I have a welcome. This looks like a really good welcome screen, this headline template. So I'm going to choose this as my headline template. And now you can see that it says, welcome to the daily plant facts. Well, that's not actually the text I want. I want to say, welcome to the toolbox. And so just by changing that, you can see that I've modified what the bottom there looks like, and then I have the footer, and I could say, Alexa, give me a random. All right, so now we have a new thing here. We have this. We also have this header image, and so the background image. So you can see that we have a logo that's provided here. We could also provide some title that is like toolbox. And then we'll add it to the top. So all of these properties are easily modified using the templates that we've been given. But in addition to that, once we're done, we can say preview and test. We can see what it's going to look like on a variety of devices. So I can flip through each of these views and see how it'll behave on different screens, whether that's a television or something small. And so we can get a feel for whether or not our screen looks the way that we want it to. You also have a really great tool down here at the bottom. This is a list of all of my Echo devices. My list is probably a lot longer than yours, but you can come in here and choose a very specific device and say, hey, send this to your device, and it'll appear on the screen of the device you've specified. Very, very cool way to see it on your physical device without having to go through a lot of work. So that is creating your template. But once I'm done, there's more to it. I also need to add that response to my skill. So what they do here is give me everything that I need to be able to add this APL to my skill. So the first part is this is the directive. This is the thing that we create that we need to send to our skill as part of our response to make sure that the APL will be displayed on the screen. It also gives us down here at the bottom the Node.js and the Python that you need to do this inside your code. So you can see that if I look at the beginning of this, I start with type and token and document, and then I have this headline template data. All of those pieces are here. Well, you'll also find that down here at the bottom. You see here's my data source I've created. As we scroll down further, we create a payload and we bring in that APL document ID that is the document that we're currently working with. And it actually has its own storage. So you don't have to create this file and store it someplace in the cloud. You can refer to it directly inside your project just by using that document ID. So in this case, I named mine welcome. All of this is built right into the developer console and makes your life super, super easy for adding APL to your screens. But once you've done that, you may also say, well, that screen was good, but it wasn't everything that I needed. So one of the other things that we can do is come into our multimodal responses. Once we have it, there's also something called the authoring tool. And you can see that for each of these, I have the ability to edit it in the authoring tool as well. This is much more kind of code forward because it allows you to manipulate all of the code inside that APL document. It also is kind of a one-way door because I can no longer go back and use the template anymore. Now what I'm using is the specific APL. And if I look at the code view here, we can see that this is what my APL looks like. And so knowing that, I can come in and modify and change any of these things. You see lots of pointers to my data source sitting here. But if I wanted to add something new to my APL document, I can just add it here and save it. Now, I still have the ability to use it in the same way that I was using it before, but I can't go back to the tool that we were using a moment ago, which is the response builder based on a specific set of templates. But you can always modify this code here without any issue. Very, very powerful tools, a very easy way for you to see what's going on. And when you make a change to your APL, just how that reflects in the view that you see here on the right-hand side. So that's multimodal responses. I wanted to make sure we covered off on both the response builder and the authoring tool to make sure that you saw both of those. But these are the tools that we use to build multimodal responses. Now, of course, you could do all of this stuff outside of the developer console. If you're comfortable writing all of this syntax on your own, there's no reason to stop you from doing that. And you can jump over to something like Visual Studio Code, where you can do a lot of your development right here. And I say a lot, but realistically, once I've gotten to the point where I'm using VS Code instead of the developer console, I almost never need to go to the developer console anymore. And let me give you some examples of that. So the first thing that I wanted to make sure I pointed out is that there is a tool here called the Alexa Skills Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. And if I open this up, you're going to see a bunch of things that are available to me. One is the skill manifest. If you aren't familiar with the skill manifest, I'll show you what that file looks like. It's called skill.json. And this file here contains all the information about what your skill can do. This is things like where your endpoint happens to be, what kind of interfaces you're using. Do you support APL, and what size devices do you support? What permissions are you requesting from your users? Where is your privacy policy in terms of use and icons and descriptions and all of the other metadata that floats around your skill? All of that lives in your skill.json file. Now, if you've never seen this file before, you've probably only worked in the developer console and you've made all those changes there. But when you're working here locally on your machine, you need to have a copy of this as well. And so that's part of what's happening here is this skill manifest. If I make changes in the cloud, if I came in here and I chose something with permissions and I wanted to add a new permission, let's say I wanted to add full address or reminders or timers or something like that. In those cases, I make those changes here in the developer console, but because I'm working here locally, I would need to bring a copy of that down again. This download button allows me to bring a copy of that skill manifest down from the developer console locally to my machine. We can also do that with our interaction model. Sometimes I find it easier to go in and create some new slots or add some dialog management in the tool itself inside the developer console. But I can come down here and say, hey, I want to download my interaction model. And it'll actually bring down that JSON file. If we look at my interaction model, that is the file that looks like this, right? That has all of my intents and slots and utterances, and this goes on and on for pages and pages of data that I need to use to manage my skill. If I make changes in the developer console, I can easily bring them back down here. The other thing that I have is this Alexa presentation language stuff, right? I can create new files, whether I want to use templates like this, and preview it and change the viewport profile. I can even download the files that I've created. So you can see that I have my video player option right here. I don't know that I've refreshed this since the one that I just created, but you can see that the video player is showing. So I can download those APL documents here, and I can also deploy my skill. This allows me to push all of my code. I'm not doing it just yet, but this allows me to push not only the front end, so all of my interaction model stuff, but it also allows me to push all of my changes to my Lambda function at AWS as well. Very, very cool. It's nice to be able to do all this stuff right here in the Alexa Skills Toolkit. But we can go beyond that. In addition, we have testing. So if I wanted to open the simulator, you might think, oh, I'm going to go to the developer console. In fact, we have the simulator sitting right here as well. And so I can say, open toolbox, and I get the same kind of chat interface that I get in the developer console. So I'm opening my skill. It's going to respond here in just a moment, hopefully. There we go. So I'm not sure why that didn't happen the first time, but we have all of the information that we need now. We've opened the skill. We've already hit an intent. And so now I could say something like, say Bazinga, right? Something we tried earlier. And what we should see is some SSML about how to do that. That's what this skill does. But I can also see the I/O. So I can see what went into my skill, what came out of my skill, and what all of that data looks like. But if we scroll down to the very bottom, we can see that we actually hit the intent request, that is the speech con intent, and the value that we received was Bazinga. So all of that stuff is happening right here locally. Now, why do I want to work locally? What is the biggest benefit to me by working locally in something like VS Code rather than working in the developer console? Well, let me show you. One of the biggest challenges I have with working in the developer console is that it can often be slow. As I make changes to my code, I have to come in and I have to do something like deploy skill, and I have to click a button, and then I have to upload a bunch of files to the cloud. And it can take, let's say 10 seconds, but it can take as long as a minute or a minute and a half sometimes. I don't want to wait that long to do these kinds of things. So when I'm working specifically in my Lambda function, I can work and iterate very, very quickly by working with what I call local debugging. I guess I shouldn't call it that. That's actually what it's called here in VS Code. But I have the ability to run my code that I'm working on here locally and make this the temporary backend for my skill. So here you're going to see I'm going to click a button. It's going to fire up the debug console. I can see that here. And it's going to run for 1 hour. So what this has actually done behind the scenes temporarily is change the endpoint of my skill, which now means that if I go into here and I open the simulator and I say something like open toolbox, what you're going to see is that it's actually going to hit this debug console instead. Now, just by opening my skill, I can see the skill request that came in. I can see the response that was sent. And each time that I talk to the skill, if I say something like, and say Bazinga, you'll notice that this console here will scroll as that content gets pushed through. And as we look at this, we can see that we are actually hitting, let's see if I can find this quickly, the intent request that is the speech con intent that has the value Bazinga. And so I am actually now running code here locally on my machine. It's hitting the Lambda function that I have here on my machine. And so if we look at my index.js file and we think about the way that this works, let's think about that speech con intent. Let me see if I can find that here quickly. The speech con intent handler. And let's go into our code for that. So I'm going to dig in just a little bit to this, to look at the speech con intent handler. And what I want to do is, instead of changing and making this the response, which is the way I would want the skill to work, I'm going to say something different. I'm going to say, this is me testing the skill using local debugging. Okay. And so just by doing that, I'm going to refresh my backend service just to make sure that it sees the changes that are there. And now if I say Bazinga, this is me testing the skill using local debugging. But we can take that a step further. Maybe I need to see a value that's happening inside my code, and I want to know what's happening at that exact moment. For example, we're creating this speak output value. So what I'm going to do is set a breakpoint right here. And I'm going to go back to my testing, and I'm going to say She shoots, she scores. What we'll see is that we actually hit the breakpoint live, and I can hover over these values and see what kind of data is inside my individual variables. If you've ever done any kind of local debugging like this, I can step through functions. I can do all of the things that I would do in any other kind of development environment. You can see that up here at the top, it actually shows me what all the values of my variables are at that exact moment. And if I hit this play button, it'll continue on and go to the simulator and give the response that the user is expecting. So all of this is done here locally. Now, the reason that this is important is because it speeds everything up. As I'm writing my backend code and I continue to work through all of this, I'm able to iterate very, very quickly. Make a change, try my skill. Make a change, try my skill. I don't have to wait for that deployment to happen every single time. This is absolutely, for anyone that has done any kind of advanced development like this, where you want to be able to iterate quickly and see the changes happen fast, this is the way to do it. So we've shown you the developer console. We've shown you the VS Code and using the Alexa Skills Toolkit. The last thing that I want to show you is actually in the terminal. There are many things that I can do here using the ask command. And as I open that up, you can see that these are the kinds of things that I can do. This is the ask CLI. And you can see here that I can do things like create a new skill or initialize the ask service or even run my skill. But one of the things that's really important when we make changes to our code, and I'm going to change this back so that I don't deploy something bad. We'll get rid of this comment and this breakpoint and save. But now down here in the CLI, I can say something as simple as ask deploy. And what it's going to do is recognize all of the changes that have been made, and it's going to push all of my code out to their appropriate locations. So once I've iterated and I've made all the changes that I want to make to my skill today in whatever coding session time I have, now I can say ask deploy, and it's going to push my front end, my interaction model, and any changes that I've made to that out to the developer console, and those changes will be persisted there. And then anything that I've made in my Lambda function, all of the Node.js code that we were just working on, all of that code is pushed out to AWS and stored there for me. So now any changes that I just made are now live and available to any of my customers. This is a really powerful way to work. It saves you a ton of time and energy and gives you more power in your testing and how you're working with your code. So I hope you learned a little bit about some of the tools that are available to you today, and I look forward to seeing how you use them. Oh, and before I go, I did want to let you know that the resources widget on the right side of your screen, you'll find a link to the developer console and a blog post covering the 3 ways to build skills for Alexa. We covered 2 of them today, the developer console and the command line interface. If you're doing things more advanced where you're building tools for developers, you might use something called SMAPI, the Skill Management API. That's the 3rd way, and it covers that in the blog post as well. I don't think that that's useful for most people. The CLI is a wrapper around SMAPI, so I think you'll be fine. But please don't forget to fill out the survey. We are constantly working to improve our Tech Talks, and we really value your feedback. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again soon.